Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art and Talk. Art and Talk is an online interviewing platform for artists to share their art, creativity, and passion. We embrace all the arts, the traditional arts and the spiritual arts, to bring you diverse and quality interviews to watch and to be inspired by. If you are an artist and you're interested in being interviewed on Art and Talk, just send an email to viewoftheartist@gmail.com and we'll get back to you with scheduling and information. Please stay in touch with us on social media, on our YouTube channel, and also on our Facebook page. We appreciate your support. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Art and Talk. And today, our guest is a New York-based graphic artist and designer and author, and he creates these amazing digital photo collages that have a distinct urban feel. And we'll be taking a look at some of these art pieces and also his book, called Footprints, which is a book about walking. Thank you again, everybody, for watching today and being with us. I'd like to welcome our guest artist for today, Jeff Williamson. Hi, Jeff, welcome.
Hi, Leslie. How are you? It's nice to see you.
Yes, great to have you here. All right, so tell us about your art. Let's go ahead and begin with your photo digital collage artwork that has this, very like New York City feel. How did all this begin? And then we'll look at a couple pieces.
Okay. Basically, I call my work digital collages, abstract digital collages. The end result being that while they're based on actual photographs that I create, that I take and then layer together and manipulate so that they pick up different aspects of each photo, and then I can draw into it or whatever needs to happen at that point. They wind up abstract, but they're based on reality. And I started doing this, I don't know, a few years back, just going out with my camera on the street, walking the streets of New York, shooting buildings, shooting neighborhoods, shooting street blocks, architectural details, trash in the gutter even, whatever caught my attention as I was walking. And after a day of collecting photos and information, I'd go back to my studio and make a selection from the group that I'd taken that day and bring them together in Photoshop. As a graphic designer, I use Photoshop quite a bit. So I would then layer these photos. And in the early days, I would literally layer them one right on top of the other so that they were all of the same size, one right on top of the other. And then I would begin to manipulate the transparency between them. I play with the color. I would do masking of areas, masking out or masking in. I would bring in little tiny details, silhouetted images or what have you. And I'd work with anything from 2 or 3 layers to 10 or 12. And the end result, I might be done within a couple of hours. I might be done in a day or two. I mean, it was so. I began to show them in shows in New York City, and I got a lot of people like them. They're unusual. They weren't sure. People look at them now, and they're not even quite sure what they are. But I'm fortunate in having some associates who were able to talk about my work to other people, and that led me to Lend-Lease. So Lend-Lease is a worldwide real estate, building development, management, and operation corporation. They're in probably every continent on the planet, and they were remodeling one floor of their New York City headquarters, which is in the what had once been the Pan Am building. If you know New York City, the Pan Am building was built in, I think, either the late 50s or the early 60s over Grand Central Station. It's one of the landmarks in the city. It's now owned by Metropolitan Life, I think. Anyway, they have several floors in that building, and they wanted to remodel one floor to create kind of a lounge for employees, or as a place you could take your clients to, or what have you. And they built in a coffee bar and a lot of small meeting areas on the floor. I showed them my work because what they were looking for local artists to show their work in this area. Essentially, it was a very big lounge. It was lounge, and they liked my work because I was able to work with actual buildings, and they have something like, I don't know, 10 to 15 buildings here in New York, and they asked me if I'd be willing to work with some of their buildings and create some artwork like I've done, with other pictures I've taken. So I said, yeah, that'd be great. And so they wanted me to do 2 images, one to go on either side of this coffee bar that they install. They were roughly 5 feet wide by 6 feet tall, which actually is the largest size I had worked with up till that point. So it was a good experience. It was interesting because it raised some new questions for me about whether or not this was going to work, having to do with resolution and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, it turned out great. And that led, I was to do some additional work there. They had a screen for motion graphics, which is just sort of adjacent to where my images are hanging. And they wanted me to work on a motion graphic image with one of their people. But that didn't happen for two reasons. One, I got a cancer diagnosis. And the other was that the pandemic came along and everything sort of just got shut down. So I'm talking to them again, and we're discussing the possibility of moving forward with something, but as of yet, it hasn't been, determined when or if it will actually happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, that's a fantastic opportunity that you had with land lease. Before we look at those images that are in that building, take us to your feet walking the streets of New York with your camera. Now, we know that you were saying, Jeff, that, okay, it's different architecture, different buildings, different details. You said it could be trash in the gutter. What is it that makes you stop, Jeff, as you're walking the streets of New York with your camera and you're like, I have to photograph that? Give us some little hints as when you get that like intuitive nudge, like that interests me, that caught my eye. What does that for you?
Good question. Well, it's different things. And sometimes when I head out, I have a different objective in mind. Sometimes I'm looking for old New York, buildings that go back to the turn of the century, or just little hints around the city of the city the way it once was. Because, if you know New York, you know that every 20 or 30 years, it kind of cannibalizes itself. And some of the old stays, but then the new comes in. And this has been happening since the beginning of New York City, But fortunately, there are still historical areas, historical buildings, downtown, there's like a wall that was built during when the Dutch were still in charge. It was still a Dutch colony. So, I'll go out and I'll look for things like that. I'll look for old buildings. Sometimes I'll go into the cemetery, downtown, where I forget who's buried there now, somebody famous from our history. Anyway, so I may want to just capture that kind of stuff. Sometimes I'm just interested in unusual architectural details, things that in and of themselves are very graphic. But taken off of the building or taken off of the fence or whatever, I can play with and use as, in the way that you might use drawing. Like if you're going to draw a wedge or an arrow or something and combine them in some particular way, you might find this iron element that's interesting on its own, although it's attached to the building. So is that making sense at all, what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes there's a certain agenda, like you were saying, it might be old New York, or you might have a specific kind of visual goal, so to speak, in mind to capture in your camera. And then sometimes you're looking at the details because you're saying, oh, okay, this will be great to add potentially into a collage when you get back in your studio and you're working up the different layers in Photoshop.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And sometimes I'll head out looking for the newer stuff that's being built in the city, newer buildings, more modern buildings, which many of which I'm not that fond of, but it's the city. And I'm I kind of decided that New York has changed in many ways. I don't, from an architectural standpoint, I don't like a lot of the newer architecture. The city is not the city that I was when I moved here in the late 1970s. But yet, when I put all these elements together in a particular way, and if I mix old and new and all these abstract things, I'm sort of recreating the city to my own desire, my own liking. It's sort of, if I can't live in the city that I want to live in, I can still live in the city that I recreated.
Wow, so that's really profound. You're actually creating the city that you want to live in through your art.
But it's also an abstract city, you know what I mean? Or maybe an impossible city. But it's a city that I created, or it's hard to say because I'm not like building an actual city, I'm not Frank Lloyd Wright or somebody. I'm taking elements of these different buildings and parts of neighborhoods and what have you, and combining them in a way that's abstract. It's not like, I can move in there, but it gives me some sense of identity and some sense of pleasure. Whoops, what happened here? Okay.
Let's go ahead and show the land lease images and have you talk about them so people can get a feel for what they look like. If you can give me just a moment, Jeff.
Okay.
All right, here's the first one.
Yeah, that's one of the two prints that I did for Lend-Lease. It's hanging on that floor to either side of their coffee bar. As I said, each one is about 6 feet high by 5 feet across. And this is made up of elements of two buildings that they have here in New York. One of which is, I believe, the Bloomberg building. Mike Bloomberg's news organization is based there. And I just like the shapes and the textures that I was dealing with on these buildings. And I just sort of took them apart and put them back together again.
And then created, as you were saying, Jeff, this sort of like abstract urban feel. In this particular case of some of the land lease buildings that they commissioned you to create in this distinct style of yours.
Yes, and they gave me a list of buildings that I could work from. And on this particular day that I went out, these two just seemed to be what I felt I wanted to work with. And I think they were very pleased. It's unusual.
And with your sense of color, and also kind of contrasting that, Jeff, with New York City, tell us how that plays, how, you kind of interjected this, saturation and color.
Yeah. That's true. It's an interesting point because New York, when you think of New York, you think of it being kind of this gray city because, the tall buildings and the concrete. And, there actually is a lot of color, but to your point, I just like bringing color in. I see the shapes, I see the texture, what have you, and I just think, well, what would happen if I did that? That's interesting. How's that going to affect this over here? And it's just I hate to use the word play, but it is in a way play. It's I think that's part of what's so much fun about it is that I'm never completely, I'm really not sure what it's going to look like when I'm done. I go into it with a very good idea, I'll have, this bunch of photos. I think in this case, I probably worked with about, I don't know, 10 photos. I guess I would say, oh, that's nice. I did this there. I like the use of that color, looks great there. What would happen if we did that and did that and did that? And then you also have a lot of happy mistakes, and
yeah, those happy mistakes are always welcome in the creative process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jeff, let's look at the space that they're in, because it's really quite striking.
Okay. Yeah, so this is as you're coming into this floor from the entrance by the elevator. So you can see that there's the Lend-Lease logo and sign on and there's this element here to the left when you first come in is a scale model of New York City. I don't know at what scale, but it's all like little plastic buildings made to scale. And then, yeah, that behind this thing in the middle, that's where there may be a person sitting there. That's actually a desk. This I don't know if you can see me pointing to that, but to the right of that is a screen, and that screen has motion graphics going across it.
Right.
Some of it are kind of promotions for Lend-Lease, but that's where they wanted to do something kind of with my work, taking it apart and then having it come together on the screen. But that hasn't happened yet. So,
what a cool space. We just want to take a moment to give photo credit to Evan Joseph, who took these photos. And we have another one a little bit closer up. We kind of get a good feel for the sitting space, whether it's the employees or whether they're sitting there with the client.
yeah, I like this. It's very intimate and pleasant there. The other photo, of course, is on the other side of the coffee bar there. Actually, this is the same image that we were just looking at. The image on the other side, I don't know if I have a picture of that in situ.
It's an amazing space, and it was an amazing opportunity for you. The space has such a great feel and such a New York metropolitan feel to it. Let's go ahead, Jeff, and let's look at the second Lend-Lease piece.
Yeah, that's the one on the other side. Yes. Yeah, it's the same buildings as the other one. Just a different arrangement, different, it's a lot about the line, the and the curves and whatnot. And the color,
And I love the sense of design, Jeff. There's a lot of movement and fluidity going on, and you think about the buildings in New York, you really kind of juxtapose that, kind of linear line to kind of to incorporate a little bit more, movement, within the composition of these photo collages.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to the credit of one of the buildings that I was working with here, it's a roundish, almost a horseshoe kind of building.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself was so interesting to me that I just had to work with that. It's just, I mean, that's also part of it. Sometimes you see something and it's just, oh, that's so great. I got to do something with that,
Mm-hmm.
And that was certainly the case with these two images.
Mm-hmm.
And
then, yes, and I love, Jeff, how you were saying that, okay, so you've taken all these images, walking the streets of New York with the buildings and the architectural details, the neighborhoods and what have you. Then you're back in your studio, you have Photoshop pulled up, you have all these different layers of your photographs. And I love that you were saying that, you don't even know how it's, the final piece is going to be. There's always that element of surprise, as we said before, it's like a happy surprise, happy accident. And it's sort of like the creative process, that whole, beautiful, zone that artists go and kind of takes on a life of its own. And then you just kind of like as the conduit, kind of, moving the shapes and moving the color and helping to, create the piece. What is your take on that?
I think, I get lost in my work. I start off and I'm very methodical in the beginning about what I'm doing. I have a certain way of getting into the process. Once the photos are taken and I'm back in the studio. But as I get deeper into it and I start encountering things that that's not really working out. I don't really like the way that's coming about. I don't like it. And I start moving things around and I start, blocking things out and masking things. And then little by little, this is getting interesting. And then something happens, something that I completely didn't anticipate happens. And it may change the whole thing into something, oh my God, just like I didn't expect that. And it really, it takes you on a whole other adventure that could lead to another adventure, or maybe that's the adventure that I needed to be on. And then I finally come to a place where I know it's done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stop and then the next day come back and say, oh, I'd like to do this or do that. You know what I'm saying? But,
right. Yes.
Mm-hmm. But it is something of an adventure.
Yes. I'm going to stop the screen share for just a moment, Jeff.
Okay.
Because I love what you said. I love the getting into the creative process with artists. I'm a little bit of a process junkie, and that was really awesome what you just said, that something happens. It's almost like it clicks. There's that magical moment in the creative process that nobody can even, you can't foretell that. You can't even say, okay, well, this is like what's going to happen. I mean, in certain, art media and mediums, you can kind of anticipate certain things happening. I was just thinking like creating glass or different things, but there's always that magical aspect. And I think that's what keeps us going back to creating, and I think even for those who are a little bit more methodical, I can certainly relate to that. There's also in the creative process, there's like a surrendering, there's like a letting go, like you have to relinquish control. You've kind of done all the work. It's like you have all the ingredients and now you have to like put it all together, but some other energy or whatever you want to call it kind of gets in there if we allow it. And then, as you said, you go on an adventure. I just found that so beautiful.
Oh, there is that moment also, I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, where something happens, you've done this, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, look at that. And then it's like, well, can I do that? I mean, can we you really start questioning whether this is the direction to go in or not. Is that, can I really put this across, or will people really buy this? And you got to go through this mental tug of war
Mm.
until you finally say, nah, I'm just going to move on, or something about this just is drawing me in. I have to pursue this. And then if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But you just have to do it.
Right, right. Jeff, let's go ahead and I know we have a few more images to look at of your digital photo collages, but they're also in your book as well. You have many, many, many of these images in your book called Footprints, which is a book about walking. Let's discuss that a little bit. How did all that begin? And tell us, you know, what is that book about? The whole walking theme and Footprints.
Right. I could read a little bit from the introduction that explains a little bit about it, but it was after I had been doing these for, I don't know, a couple of years. I felt I love books. Let me start by saying that I love books. I began my career as a writer, and I'm very interested in how in books that the words and the images become married in such a way that it ceases to be about the words or about the images on their own, but that it's the sort of the hybrid that they become. You couldn't take you know, in a way, it's a funny way that I used to work in advertising, and print ads, when they're done well, start with a photo and then a headline. And if you look at the photo, you're looking at one thing. If you read the headline, that says something else. But when you put those two things together, it creates a whole new communication, you know. I could think of thousands of them, except I can't think of one right now. But I've always been intrigued by the idea of that, and wanting to be able to do that idea, extend it over the course of a book rather than just one page in a magazine. And I don't even know exactly what that means because it changes, but I'm kind of in pursuit of that coming together and two separate elements becoming one. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then how they can like fit together, you know, harmoniously as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I wanted to do a book of my work. I was feeling very self-conscious at the time. And I thought, well, I can't just do pictures. There has to be text here, you know. It was my fears, whatever you want to call it. And I thought, well, okay, what I'll do is I'll find quotations from famous people. I knew I wanted to do about walking. The whole idea of walking started with my walking around the city and taking pictures and stuff, you know, and I'd spend a whole day, I'd be out on the street for, you know, 8-9 hours just taking pictures and stuff. So it was going to be about walking. And I interviewed, so I dug up quotations from famous people that are in the public domain, because I had no budget for paying the folks. And also to get somebody's quote for a book is a huge ordeal. You know, if you're not rich or with one of the big publishing houses, it's it's really hard to get somebody to give you their quote. You know, it's all sorts of legal wrangling back and forth. So I found, you know, quotes from people like Thoreau or Walt Whitman, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, various people, and I printed on one page their quotation, and then I went through all of my images and looked for one that I felt in some way either illustrated or commented on what they were saying. I don't have the pictures here, but there's one photo of a forest in snow with this sort of shack in the background. And I used that with a quote from Harriet Tubman about, if you're in the forest and you hear footsteps coming after you, just run. Don't look back, don't stop, just keep running, And, Harriet Tubman led hundreds of enslaved people to the North Country, upstate New York and into Canada. And what struck me about that was one, the greatness of that, but also you had these folks from the South, these African-American folks from the South, putting their lives on the line to run through these forests and to get out. And when they arrived in a white world. It might have been better than the world they were living in before, but it was still a white world. And they weren't just, greeted with open arms by everybody they encountered, even though it was a much better environment than it was down in Mississippi or Alabama. So I thought that photograph of the snow and the shack, and there's a chilliness to it that doesn't quite invite you in, but it's better than what you're leaving. Mm-hmm. It's just part of the whole racial dynamic, which we're still struggling with in this country, sadly.
Are you, do you have your book handy? Could you read us a little section of it and I'll pull up the cover?
Well, I could read from the introduction.
Okay, perfect.
Or I could read some of the people's statements. What I didn't mention in talking about it was that I ended up inviting other people to talk about walking, their walking experiences, what walking means in their life. Mm-hmm. If they wanted to be in the book, and a few people sent me stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, I could also read those if we want to go in that direction.
And that's up to you. I'd love for you to share a little bit of the book Footprints, and I'll pull up the cover so we can all take a look at it while you're reading.
Maybe I'll just read from the introduction, since I don't have photos for each one of those situations, like the Harriet Tubman one, or do you know what I'm saying?
Sure, that sounds perfect, Jeff.
Okay. Okay.
And I love your artwork on the cover, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I actually, it was actually by accident, but I actually snuck my daughter and wife in this photograph over to the side. Mm-hmm. I didn't even realize when I first started putting this together that they were there. And I looked and I said, oh my God, that's Eliza and my wife. Okay, I'm just going to sort of jump around a little bit in this, but so I'll begin here. As a New York City resident, I devote considerable time and physicality to walking simply to get to where I need to go. But in one of the greatest walking cities in the world, I also devote myself to other benefits of walking, particularly the meditative experience and introspection that walking the city streets brings and the inspiration that often results. Roaming the streets, I am energized by the population that has actually increased and includes a wider variety of peoples in greater numbers. But I sometimes long for the grittier, wilder city that first drew me in. Where are the impromptu performances, the street comics, the poets who could create a poem for you on the spot, the armless chalk artist who drew sections of the Sistine Chapel ceiling perfectly on the sidewalk with his toes? Sadly, they have all gone the way of the homeless who had once dominated entire blocks of countless neighborhoods to the chagrin of most New Yorkers. An upsetting presence they were, to be sure, but not one without value to the vibrant city tapestry. The homeless community reminded us that New York truly was a microcosm of the world, and that this traveling carnival of a city was a place that held promise for even its most dejected residents. In recent years, I've taken long walks through the streets looking for buildings, architectural details, whole blocks that are familiar, but have found much has been replaced by newer structures and completely foreign environments. Some I like, but mostly the newer architecture seems out of place to me. Manhattan was and is changing to suit the needs of a different time, one more accommodating to the wealthy, while ordinary people have been abandoned, displaced from their neighborhoods by skyscrapers and skyrocketing rents. Practically gone are mom and pop stores, performance lofts, affordable entertainment, and hole-in-the-wall eateries. The outer boroughs have picked up some of these establishments, particularly Brooklyn, but even Brooklyn is seeing its momentary hipster significance compromised by wealthy developers and their city hall enablers. On my walks a few years ago, I began taking pictures of Manhattan, documenting buildings and neighborhoods that have been gentrified and neutered by the powers that be, the powers that control New York City. At the end of the day, I returned to my studio and began making the kind of digital collages I had been experimenting with for a while. What I quickly realized was that I was reconfiguring Manhattan. If I could no longer live in the city I wanted, then I would make what now exists into something I could control. My new Manhattan contained vestiges of what was old and familiar to me, but also incorporated the new, but in a way of my own choosing. So after a few years of doing this and showing my work in group shows, I decided to put together a book. At that time, I was mostly concerned with showcasing my artwork, but out of self-doubt, felt that the text would also be needed to justify making the book. I found notes on walking from famous people who were in the public domain and began to pair them with my collages. I can't say there wasn't some appeal to this slim volume, but to me, not enough. Something was missing. Then last year, I received a cancer diagnosis, and for much of the year was in treatment, then recovery. When I felt up to it, I would take a walk, or more likely walk my dog. I left my camera at home and concentrated on walking and taking Prudence to the dog park. I found great relaxation in these walks. Slowly, my mind got clearer, and as I abandoned many of the drugs I had been prescribed, I found I was feeling better and thinking clearer. When the time felt right, I posted on Facebook that I had been ill and chose to hide like a cat who crawls into the back of a closet when it's sick. I mentioned that I had found walking helpful in rebuilding my strength and clearing away the cobwebs. I also mentioned that I had been at work on a book about walking and invited anyone who was interested to submit a few words, a paragraph or more if they would like to be included in the book. I received 19 submissions. Opening the project up to others was exciting, and it was challenging, for it seemed that my artwork became less relevant as the book expanded to include a wider representation of views, none of which having anything to do with my initial concept. The act of walking took on different interpretations. While my co-contributors and I, to some extent, had wanted to emphasize the meditative and health-boosting effects of going for a walk, I now found myself contemplating other aspects of this activity. And it now occurred to me that walking wasn't only about getting from point A to point B, wandering, exercising, warring, or contemplation. It was often, if not always, about something else. Every day in one part of our planet or another, people are walking for the sake of staying alive. They walk to get food. They walk to fetch clean water. They walk to seek medical care. This is true whether one lives in the Congolese jungle or New York City. And right now, in the Middle East, throughout Africa, Asia, and Latin America, even the US, people are walking thousands of miles to seek safety and sanctuary. We're all walking, and at the root of this mass ambulation is the same motivation, the need to survive. I thought I would end it there, if that's okay.
Thank you, Jeff, for sharing that. What a fascinating introduction and a fascinating city. And you kind of interweave so many different elements on, there's some historical reflections, on a broader perspective, and then also your observations of change in New York City, and then also, your personal experiences as well. What a beautiful introduction. And also all the different metaphors that walking can represent. And also, as you were saying, the walking kind of being a substitute in the sense of something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's go ahead and look at, we still have a few more minutes. I'd like to get a little bit more of your artwork in. So let's pull that up and have you share anything that you'd like to share with us about that.
Okay.
Give me just a moment. And all right, let's look at this one.
Mm. Yeah, this is an early one. I did this. This is one of the first pieces that I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually even put this on a t-shirt.
Ah.
This is essentially, I call it, I labeled this East Village, New York. It's arguable whether it's the East Village or the Lower East Side, but they both look pretty much the same. What I ended up doing, I don't know how many photographs I've got here. I'm guessing that I probably used about 6.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow what it is like old New York tenements from the early 1900s, and other buildings that were built later, sort of, you know, mixed with more modern construction.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of what goes on in the city anyway. It's just not, you know, on top of each other that way, but you get that sense. You can walk down one city block and go from the 19th century, you know, to the 21st century,
Mm-hmm.
and everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, this appeared in a publication once, and the editor there chose to call it "Hanging On to the East Village."
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was sort of an interesting title to give this, because it does have that sense of, you know, the East Village is still there, it's still standing, and it's still beautiful, you know, in its way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know,
But
what
it also,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, and then it also relates to these other buildings and these other periods.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And what I find interesting, Jeff, is you were saying this is was either your first piece or one of your first pieces, and a very distinct style has already emerged.
Hmm.
So it's almost like you kind of found your creative niche and your visual voice, so to speak, rather early on.
Yeah, you know, you're right. This has always been a favorite of mine, and that's probably for what you said.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of set the tone, set the direction in a way of,
Mm-hmm.
of where I was going.
Mm-hmm. And you just feel the aliveness and energy of New York as well, and plus all the different elements that you were saying as well, kind of bringing the old with the new, and you know, bringing your sense of color, your sense of design, and you know, your graphic artist influence as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I can still look at this one. You know, sometimes you've worked on something and you don't particularly care to look at it anymore. You know, you get tired of it or whatever. But this is one I can always look at.
Mm-hmm. It's one of your favorites.
Yeah. And as I said, it was the one when I did one T-shirt and I decided to use this on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny when you're walking down the street and you see somebody wearing your T-shirt. You know, it's gratifying.
Yes, that must be a great feeling.
Yeah.
Jeff, let's go ahead and look at the last one that we have.
Now this is a much later one, and I began to work a little bit differently at this point. Whereas with the one we just looked at, I worked with photographs that were all the same size, the same dimensions, and I just stacked them up, you know, stacked them so they were evenly placed. In this one, I created a large background and brought a lot of images into it. and spent time. It gave me more room to move things around, and, mask things out, and duplicate things if it seemed appropriate. And it made it larger. I think this piece is probably around 2 feet by 3 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the one we were just looking at was only about 10 by 14.
Mm-hmm. I see. Mm-hmm.
And, again, it's the same thing. I mean, I'm bringing in modern buildings, some of the older buildings, but I'm also playing with textures here that caught my attention.
Mm-hmm.
Holes in metal walls from out on, I'm blanking on the name. It's Fort Tilden, which is an old military base out on near Rockaway, and it's in deterioration. It's an old factory building essentially, and all the metal walls have gashes and holes and stuff. So I really like that. I like those things that you might consider to be ugly, but I saw the beauty in them. So if you look over in this area here, you see them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I brought in girders, from construction buildings being built, steel girders, and just a lot of elements that made it more fun actually to play with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dealing with the buildings and all that, but I'm also dealing with these other strange, perhaps not very attractive pieces in and of themselves, but I see the beauty in it.
Right, absolutely. Seeing that beauty, it's such a beautiful thing, and it's interesting that we could see some of the evolution, some of the new things that were taking place. Like now you were added, interested into the texture and kind of doing a couple different things visually. So it's neat to see how everything kind of like evolves. We only have a few more minutes left, Jeff. I have a couple of questions, and then we'll offer you the closing comments. The first question is, your time getting out now in New York, can you just give us a little bit of an update? What is it like currently? Just if you're out there walking around from what you've experienced.
Yeah, well, the truth is that for the last year, I've been a hermit. I've hardly been out on the street for the last year because I've had, I had cancer. I thought it was in remission, and then it metastasized and spread throughout my body, and I had a lot of issues. So I've been, on treatment, many different treatments, and it takes a lot out of you. So I've been, spending a lot of time just in my apartment or just walking my dog around. And also the pandemic has just, for a while here in New York, the pandemic was brutal. People were dying by, literally by the truckloads. It was just horrible. So between my cancer and wanting to avoid the pandemic, I didn't get out much. But I began taking photos. The only place I really went was Sloan Kettering, which is the cancer hospital where I'm getting my treatments. And I began taking photos inside the hospital. Now, I haven't really started this project, but I was thinking about doing a book on cancer. Not on the horrors of cancer, but, doing graphical, work, images in the kind of style that we've been talking about, and kind of, I don't want to be celebrating it, but there's a different way of thinking about it. I mean, when you tell people, well, I'm going to do a book on cancer, they assume you're going to talk about the horrors that you went through and, the discomfort and I don't really want to do that. I'm more interested in the things that are raised for me and the thoughts that came through my mind while I was getting, the infusions into my vein or what, there's other ways of approaching. I don't know whether this book is going to come together or not. We'll see. I don't want to go on about it anymore because it doesn't exist yet, except in a very barren form.
Well, it sounds like an interesting project, from what all that you've gone through, and most of us, can't even imagine. So it'd be interesting to see, if that does, take shape with you or not. And of course, we wish you, full healing for you, so you can, get back full time to your creative pursuits. We do need to wrap the show up, Jeff. We would like to offer you the closing comments, and then let us know how we can stay connected with you.
Okay. Closing comments. I was just thinking as I was talking, how the walking book that I did, when I opened it up and invited people to share their experiences of walking, how it changed the book, but it also changed me. It just got fuller and more textural and more deeper. And I felt really connected to the people people I don't really know. So I was just thinking, this cancer book, which I've been thinking about, it's been on my mind now for the better part of a year. I'm taking notes and I've done some artwork, which I'm not happy. But I was just thinking that if anybody who's watching this has any experience with cancer, either their own health or a parent or a relative or a close friend or something, and would like to participate in the book in some way, by sharing a paragraph or a page or what have you, I would love to talk with you. And you can contact me through my email and say, I am interested, and I can get in touch with you and we can just talk it out a little bit. Yeah, I like that. I really, in a way, there's like doing it myself, what I'm doing, where I'm really satisfying my own creative urges, but something about bringing other folks in and working with them was really good, really stimulating and enlightening.
What a beautiful invitation to have it a little bit more of a collaborative effort.
Thank you. Yeah, I think if anybody's interested, they might find it a fun project. And the fact that it would be starting more from the ground up than the last book, I think just has greater possibilities for something great.
Absolutely. And let us know, Jeff, how can we stay in touch with you?
So by email is best. It's Jeff, Jeff, Will, Will, D, as in David, @gmail.com. That's jeffwilld@gmail.com. And my phone number, which I'm happy to take calls, 917-991-6074. And I do have a website. The website's grossly in need of updating, but if you'd like to go there, you can also send me a message through the website, and that would be jeffwilliamsonart.com.
All right, very good. Jeff, thank you so much for being our guest artist today on Art and Talk and exploring this whole urban photo collage art pieces that you have, and then of course, with the land lease and your book Footprints and the whole beauty of the walking and the whole message in the book as well. So thank you so much, Jeff, and continued success. And again, best wishes for full healing for you. And I hope these projects come to fruition, and, who knows, or maybe some other ones, that emerge, as time moves on as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leslie. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you,
Sure,
everyone. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching Art and Talk. Again, we appreciate the time you take to watch our artist videos, and we'll talk soon on the next Art and Talk. Until then, be well and be blessed. Thank you again, Jeff.